Yo, what up, Monster Train conductors? Gabriel here with the first of our rare draft tier lists. We're going to start with Awoken. Not really any big reason to start with them other than just switching up the order a bit. And I will say, they do have the number one taken rare for me in the game. You can go ahead and make your bets right now on what that is. Not many to choose from here. It's always 8 rares for all of these clans, so make your bets. And by the way, on that note, I might as well just say it on this first video. A lot of times when I'm talking about strength of clan, strength of certain strategies, strength of certain cards or synergies or champ paths, I'll often bring up any particular rare to support an argument, but almost every time the responding comment will just be, and I'm not singling anybody out in particular, everybody does this. It's always like, well, it's a rare, right? That's the quote that I always see. Which, I don't know. To me, I guess the implication there is that you don't see it that often, which I'm going to tell you right now, it's just verifiably false. Unless their thought is that you see it on less than half of runs, then that's true. But let me just pull up an article here really quick. This is by Wally. I did a lot of nice calculations here, so just focus on this table here, really. So this is drafts, right? We're not talking about banners. Now, if you made that argument for banners, I'd agree with you. Banners are harder to calculate, but in a general sense, the best situation possible, which you'll almost never see, you'd only have a 30% chance. You're more than likely looking at maybe between a 10 and 20% chance to see any rare banners. So I agree if we're talking about banners, but it's usually always talking about a rare draft. And they'll be like, oh, it's a rare. But what does that even mean? If you look right here, this isn't even factoring in caverns, by the way, I believe. Only regular drafts are considered. So keep in mind, a lot of these rares, like a rail spike or a tome, have additional caverns you can see them at. That's not even factored in this probability. Or just some caverns just give you rare cards, right? But, if we're just talking about rares, on the Ring 3 reward and the Ring 6 reward, you're guaranteed to only see rares, right? Now, it is a single draft that pulls from both clans, but still, it's a pool of 16 cards. It's 3 of them, so, there's replacement, right? So 1 out of 16, 1 out of 15, 1 out of 14. You get that guaranteed twice every run, on top just the normal chance to see a rare in any given draft. So what does that come out to be? That means that in any given run, you have a 40.6% chance higher, somewhat higher, probably not obviously going up to like 50%, but, a decent, maybe a percent or two higher than 40.6% chance if you factored in caverns as well, that you're going to see any given card. So, and you'll see that reflected in my data. I will do a quick look at the data for Awoken at the end of this, so stick around if you want to see that. But, you'll see that it's not that uncommon to see a rare. Even comparing it to an uncommon, right, the blue tier, or even the common, obviously these are higher, 63% and 59.1%. They, I would say, though, don't gain much from the caverns. You don't really see anything other than maybe a consumable at the caverns. But the rares, they're not that far behind. To me, 40, roughly 4, a little bit higher than 4 out of 10 times, 4 out of 10 runs, you'll see any single rare. To me, that's not that low. To me, that doesn't scream rare to me in the word of rare. It just means to me, it's like, that almost seems like uncommon, I would say, if I were just to be assigning a word to something. But, that's probably neither here nor there. I just wanted to give that little tidbit because I feel like it's worth mentioning when you're thinking about strategies and whatnot. It's also worth mentioning that you can use that to your advantage, right? So if before Ring 3, you have roughly a 40% chance to see any rare, you can start planning around that. If you don't see it, that choice goes down significantly, right? Now you only have about a 20%. Like if you didn't find the rare that you want at that Ring 3, you're now looking at maybe a 20% chance to see it. So you can use these things to determine what your outs are and what your likelihood to see them, right? Now, all that being said, the way the rares for every clan is very very different than rating the commons and the uncommons, right? Because every rare card, well, not every rare card, but we'll say like 90% of all rare cards have an extreme high roll opportunity associated with them. They have very large power levels when the situation arises. They're almost always situational. Very few of them are just sort of always takes. One of them here is that, though, and that's going to be the one that's my most taken rare in the game. But again, you can probably guess what that is if you look at these 8. It's probably not that hard. But so but you know, even there's stuff that ends up pretty low ranked for me that technically has the potential to be very good in the right deck. But the way I'm evaluating this is how often does that situation come up paired with just how useful is it in general. So without further ado, let's start with adaptive mutation here. What do you think adaptive mutation is? So generally, the problem with adaptive mutation is it's a problem that with a lot of cards that usually never make it that high into my ratings, right? Where within clan, you know, within the context of Awoken as a clan, adaptive mutation really doesn't do anything that well, in my opinion. There used to be a nice roll into Awoken Hollow with it in the old version of Awoken Hollow because it just cultivated itself always. And it could just be turned into a backline carry unit at that point with adaptive mutation. And that was a high roll, but I would say that doesn't really work anymore. I would say it could, I guess, work, but I never do that anymore. So really, within clan, it doesn't provide anything, which usually means it can't be that high on my list, right? Because I'm just relying on other clans to actually synergize with it. So clearly it couldn't be S tier, could it? Could it? Well, it is. Now, here's the reason. This card is one of the most easy auto-win cards in the game. And true, it doesn't always make sense in a deck. When does it make sense? Well, if you have any amount of rage, it absolutely makes sense. I would argue any decent rage-generating deck, this is an auto-win. It's the easiest, one of the easiest auto-wins in the book. You know, if you weren't aware of that interaction, basically, you know, adaptive mutation, it flips your attack and health, but when rage is there, it flips the attack and health of what they're showing right now. So everything you gained from rage is going to go into your health. And in a lot of cases, your damage doesn't go down at all there. In a lot of cases, it actually goes up. Usually when you've played adaptive twice, like adaptive is definitely nice as a one-off, but if you can somehow Hellvent it, or consume remove it, or consume return it, all of those situations just make it even that more of a high roll, because once you play adaptive twice on a unit that has rage, there's no way you're losing that run. You'd have to really be in a weird spot to have lost that run, because that unit is never dying, and they're killing anything they touch. But here's the thing with adaptive. Even though within clan it doesn't do anything, almost every clan in the game has rage. Hellhorn's the most obvious one. You're almost always going to be able to make this work with Hellhorn. That's why this is one of the big reasons that Hellhorn is such a nice pairing with Awoken. I mean, every variant of Hellhorn and Awoken has to be S tier in my book. I would also mention that I think it's one big reason why Shardtail and Awoken are such a good combo. Or even just any variant of Awoken main with Queen's Imp secondary, is because you have two very easy auto-win situations, right? So that's two cards that each have a 40% chance to be found, right? Adaptive Mutation, auto-win. And then Transcendent, because you have the Queen's Implings, auto-win. That's two 40% chances at just an auto-win within the clan, not even factoring in just all the other massive synergies there. So they're very, very powerful clan combos, but, so Hellhorn's the most obvious. We can't even go over in a video how many different ways there are to get rage there. But, you know, the other clans, you have, Nameless Siren with Stygian. It or its infusion is going to be great there. Definitely super high roll with the adaptive mutation. Umbra has Perils and Void Binding. Both of those are great rage-inducing cards. Well, they don't induce rage. They induce bliss. But rage on the board, they give you rage. In real life, they give you bliss and happiness. And Adaptive Mutation just takes you to that next level. You're in heaven then. Furnace Staff used to give rage too, by the way. All the OGs know that. And then Melting Remnant has Paraffin Enforcer, one of my most taken banners in the game. And then Sludge Boss. Not so taken for me these days, but still a good unit. And I will say, when you have Adaptive with it, it's amazing. Also, anything you infuse its essence into will benefit from that. And then the only clan other than Awoken that doesn't have rage is Wormkin. But guess what? Wormkin also benefits from Adaptive. The highest roll is Corruptor Spine Chief. It's bonkers with Corruptor Spine Chief. You just get the extra damage from the echoes. It does the same interaction as rage. You're just flipping that attack into the health, but it just stays there because you still get all the extra attack from the echoes, right? And you know what? It's worth mentioning to a lesser extent, the Echo Stone upgrade at the Merchant of Steel can have decent synergy here. It's probably not quite to the level of Auto-Win, but it is definitely making Adaptive Mutation still a high-value card to add at that point. And the flies love it too, particularly if you have the Bogfly Chrysalis. So, and also, you have a lot of consume return mechanics with Wormkin. And it's also worth mentioning, like I said, there are caverns, and there are times when you can find Adaptive when you're not even in Awoken. Like, say you have Hellhorn and Echorite. I've found Adaptive Mutation then from a cavern, and it is stupidly hilarious how broken that is. So, like I said, we'll do a data dive at the end of this. So it's like, this is the one exception I can think to the rule where a card that is highly situational, that doesn't have any situation within its own clan to shine, is actually an S tier card, because every other clan basically has a decent enough chance for it to shine. But all that being said, there's definitely chances, particularly outside the Hellhorn combo, that you may not be able to make the card work, and it's not worth adding to your deck in those cases. And then we get to Awoken's Rail Spike. If you guessed it, if you guessed that this was the card that is my most taken rare, you are correct. And for that reason, it gets to the top of S. It is just rares just aren't really these always takeable type cards typically, but this is one of them. And it even was nerfed. It used to give 2 Ember reduction on them, if you could believe it or not, but now it's just 1, and it's still pretty god tier. It's weird. It's my most taken rare, but I don't even necessarily think it's god tier. I think it's S tier. Because I feel like the ceiling, I don't actually meet it that often. It's usually just a nice card to have in my deck, and maybe it ends up being crazy. But most of the time, it's just a nice way to draw and reduce the Ember on cards, and that's just a really nice thing to have in a deck. Like, when would I never want that? And it's almost always the thing I'm taking from the Rail Spike event. It's almost always the thing I might just take from a cavern where I get a Awoken rare offered, or just from the rare drafts. Like, really no reason to skip this card, I feel. Like, it's just always takeable. I can't think of any time I'm like, damn, I wish I didn't take Awoken's Rail Spike, right? There's a lot of high rolls for it. You can get infinites with it. It's probably the easiest card to put an infinite together with. A lot of different clans have different ways to do that. Wormkin has Wormkin etchings that you just kind of flip-flop with it, and you'll get an infinite going there. Or just, even like consume removing it and having the X cost artifact, first hell pack. That'll get you there often. Even in general, just having that hell pact makes this card amazing. You can even -2 the Ember on it, and it becomes quite good. Just a really solid card that always does pretty nice things for you. Almost every deck archetype loves it. Encant loves it. Inspire loves it. Etch loves it. Anything. It can reduce the cost on your endless units if you draw it at the right time. You know, it's pretty nice to do, like, reduce the Ember on a Transcendent or something. So yeah, Awoken's Rail Spike, it's my most taken rare in the game by, as far as drafts go, by a pretty decent margin. You'll see it in my data. And then the next card, this is like I feel like Channel Song is the classic noob trap card. I was just definitely guilty of it when I was a noob. It's like, holy crap. 1 Ember? Give a unit like all these stats and make it cost nothing? This was the best card in the game. Wrong. Card sucked. It was like, it was like, I'd almost argue almost never worth taking in the pre-DLC. But I will say this, post-DLC, I've taken it a little bit, enough to just barely keep it out of the D tier, I feel. It hasn't necessarily been that great. So I guess the thing is, I find myself in the DLC, you know, it benefits from having intrinsic, let's put it that way. You can build a strategy around a non-banner unit with Channel Song. There's also some applications with banner units. You know, it's not bad to have this along with Lodestone Totem, for example, or some other like Shadow Siege or whatnot. The problem there is Lodestone, it makes a lot of sense with, because you'll take Lodestone, but there is a certain chicken egg here with something like a Consumer of Crowns or a Shadow Siege, where like you would have had to take that banner most likely before you found Channel Song. So I just don't find myself often in the situation where I would use it for those high roll banner unit scenarios. But what I end up using it for is usually like pulling out a Imp or a Tomb or a Draft. Those are going to be the best uses of it. But dare I say, in those cases, the extra health is actually a downside. A lot of times you want these units to die often, right? But with Melting, it's less of an issue if you can find a burnout upgrade on it. But with Hellhorn, it can sometimes be a significant downside to have given the 20 health here. You know, you don't, even if it's like a fledgling imp, you want that thing to die. And it's pretty hard to do that if it just survives everything, especially like mid to early game. Nothing like it might go several waves without dying, which is absolutely detrimental to your plan. So I rarely find the extra stats are anything but a downside. So it's still like a pretty shitty card, honestly. I've had in my mind, there's like some run that exists where Channel Song like is the only way to scale your unit. And then that's like your win condition. I've never experienced it, but I've mused about it. But obviously it just comes like, I don't know. I thought about putting it in the D tier. I think I've taken it. The date range I'm looking at is from July 1st onward, because I feel like that is just a nice ambiguous point of when I started playing a little bit better. Like my data prior to that, I don't feel I played that well. So I like to just look at the data of when I'm playing well to see what was doing well for me. And I think this was 8-2. We'll look at the data afterward to know for sure. So like 8-2 to me is like borderline D+ to C- tier. We'll leave it in C though, because I do feel it has resulted in wins and it was pretty integral in them. Enough that I'll give it a C- tier, we'll say. Then we have Cycle of Life. This one is a weird one because this one doesn't really fit. This is similar to Awoken's Rail Spike, where it's not very situational, I would say, necessarily. I'm putting it at the C tier. Even though it's above Channel Song, I'd still say it's C-. It's like a, you know, Channel Song gets a 70%, Cycle of Life gets like a 71% C- grade, like if this were college or high school or whatever. It's just so damn overcosted for what it does. It used to give 4 spikes, I believe. I don't know why they felt the need to nerf it to 3. It was never, ever a good card. But like I said, Cycle of Life, you know, cards like Adaptive Mutation and Channel Song, they're not just sort of general use cards. It's like you have a specific situation you want to use those for, and it can really high roll in those situations. But with Cycle of Life, I don't feel that's the case. Cycle of Life's just like, I guess, like, did I need the extra 10 health? The spikes are completely irrelevant. You could remove the spikes from the card and it doesn't change anything. It's like, to me, the only thing here is the 10 health, and for 3 Ember, that's pretty fucking shitty. Compare that to Echo and Fusion, and you see the laughable difference between that common card and this rare card, right? But, you know, that being said, every now and then it's just something that can help a deck. It's never that high rolly, but it can help sometimes. Sometimes I do need that extra 10. And sometimes I'm running Split Anvil, and sometimes I'm running Volatile Gauge. It's good in those scenarios, right? It can also be, I will say, if you -2 it at a temple and you hold it over, it can provide eventually pretty decent value. You know, you can get your health up, and I guess at that point the spikes are almost relevant. But yeah, it's, I don't know. It only really, also when you factor in like, you factor in Merchant of Magic upgrades, it's not a card you would like permafrost. It's not a card you would double stack. It can't be consumer moves, so really only holdover makes sense on it. And Ember reductions, obviously. So it's not like it adds, some of these cards, they add additional high rolls to your Merchant of Magics, which kind of is just good for a run. This doesn't do that. So I don't know. I could argue D tier for Cycle of Life as well as Channel Song, but I think I picked it enough to keep it out of D tier. Unlike my actual D tier selections, which right here, we'll get there. Now I will say in my data, it's only picked, I guess, once. I will say I'm not looking at, mutated, or not mutated run. Well, I'm not looking at mutated runs, but I'm also not looking at, like seeds, like when I play users seeds. I will say Shard Channeler is not properly represented in my data because I know for a fact I've used it to great effect in a lot of these, other users seeds. But all that being said, I think it's still D tier. It does have a high roll, which is basically when you have a spike stack going, but the problem there is that's so rare, right? Icarus, I would say it's borderline win more with Icarus though, but it can be good with Icarus. It can definitely help if you're going for score, because for those flying boss, well, for Patient or Arcus, but definitely Divinity, it basically halves the amount of time that it would take to have the boss die, which often results in flying kills. But I think that actually the biggest use for it is with Thorn Hollow. I have made it pretty useful with Thorn Hollow. Thorn Hollow is a unit that's been kind of growing back on me. For the longest time, it was just useless to me in the DLC. I wouldn't go so far as to say Thorn Hollow is good, but I will say it's usable, and sometimes it might actually be the best line in a given run. And Shard Channeler, the problem with Thorn Hollow is it needs some sort of high roll to help it. It needs either the Double Spikes artifact, Petrified Crucible or whatever it's called. It needs like a Shadow Eater infusion. Or it needs a Symphony of the Soul, or it needs Shard Channeler. Ideally, probably 2 Shard Channelers, if I'm being honest. But it works. Like, I've definitely won runs where I didn't roll really anything that special for Thorn Hollow other than a Shard Channeler. I end up duping the Shard Channeler like 2 or 3 times, and that's enough to get you through the run. You know, it's not necessarily a smooth run, but it's a run that will win. So, you know, even though I'm putting Shard Channeler in the D tier, I do feel it's not one that I hate, and maybe it will move up for me as I continue to use Thorn Hollow more. But here's the problem. I'm never going to force myself to use Thorn Hollow. I'm only going to do it when it makes sense to. And I still don't necessarily think Thorn Hollow is a go-to that you should be looking for, right? I think the other Awoken units are so solidly consistent that you're better off using the other ones in most cases. But yeah, I guess there's not much more I can say about Shard Channeler. It technically has a nice effect. It's the only channeler, in my opinion, of Awoken that can realistically have an impact on a run. And even then, it's still D tier. But if they ever buff spikes, it'll become a good card, you know? Like, if they actually make cards like Sharpen and Cycle of Life and what is that other card? The uncommon Pyre Shards. If they make them actually apply a proper amount of spikes, because right now, let's be honest, they don't even come close in the Divinity world to applying a proper amount of spikes. They don't even come close. If for some reason that ever got reworked, I think Shard Channeler becomes pretty good. It's just happenstance that it's D tier. But in a vacuum, the card is actually pretty valuable. Unlike the next card we're looking at, Spreading Spores. D tier. And honestly, yeah. It's trash tier. It's one of the worst cards in the game. It is not better than either Awoken starter card. Hands down. A Restore is better. A Root Seeds is better. 100%. So why would you ever add this to your deck? This card sucks so much fucking ass that it makes me mad. I'm legitimately mad at how bad this card is. And like I said, there are cards I can be swayed on. I will never, ever be swayed on Spreading Spores. I have given it so many chances. It just never makes sense. It's so bad. Which sucks because it's technically a fun card, right? Like, just this replicating card could be so fun, but you know, once they nerfed double stack, there was just no way this card's ever going to make a use. Even with double stack, I think if they unnerfed double stack in the Divinity world, this card is just way too slow. I have a simple fix for this card, by the way. It wouldn't make it broken. It wouldn't even make it that great. It would make it a usable card. Simply have it restore 2 health along with these effects. You know, that's not going to break the bank. What it is going to do is it's going to make it at least as, you know, as useful as a restore to your Cultivate decks, you know, or to your Rejuve decks, I should say. But as it stands, it's not better than a restore for that. It costs 2. It does not allow you to, like, spam Rejuves. It doesn't even benefit from an Edge Prior, which further makes Edge Prior useless. It costs 2. Like, it doesn't, it's so bad. It's so bad. Like, I have to cool down just even talking about this card because I hate it so much. Like, if you take this card a lot, stop it. You're fucking yourself up by doing it. It is so irrelevant. It's the worst way to fill your deck with crap. It truly is a spore. It's a fungus. It's the fungus among us. 2 regen and 2 spikes is never going to be good enough. Double stacking it to 4 regen and 4 spikes is also not good enough. It's not. It isn't good enough. You'll never be able to convince me otherwise. It's so bad. Whew. Take a chill pill, Gabriel. Jesus. Alright. Back to the bright side of things. Unleash the Wildwood. I think it barely cracks the S tier for me. This is a card that is really good when it's good, and I think often it is good. But it doesn't make sense in every deck. They nerfed it from 0 to 1. I'm fine with that. It never really made a whole lot of sense to me that it was 0. It honestly could get nerfed again probably and still be a pretty good card. Like, comparing it to, like, Awake is kind of a head scratcher. I mean, I guess this is a rare, so it should be more powerful, but yeah, like, it's just so much better. A complete heal to the whole floor. I mean, it is what it is, right? This is kind of a godsend in a lot of runs. You know, it's a great holdover target, and it's a great permafrost target, so it has those going for it. It's a decent Ember cost reduction target. It's great for Cultivate decks. It's great for just having a good high health tank, like, say, when I say Cultivate, I basically always mean Rejuvenate, but let's be honest, most Rejuvenate decks are going to be Awoken Hollow, which is a Cultivate, so I get that mixed up a lot. You'll just have to bear with me on that. But I think it's really good with, like, Steel Singer. It's really good with Sentient. Basically all versions of Sentient. If you go full Cultivate, you're going to have a large health pool, and you're going to want to get hit, and this is a nice way to just bring your health back and keep it at full. If you're Explosive, pretty self-explanatory there. It's a Cultivate trigger. If you're Spikes, it's actually pretty good too, because usually if I go Spikes Sentient, by the way, has grown on me a lot in the last few whatever months, but like, my usual use for that would be I would just have it on the bottom on its own floor. And I love to get Unleash the Wildwood in that case because you just play it. You don't even necessarily need it on holdover. You like it on holdover, but you can just play it whenever it comes about. Usually with the Awoken, you're cycling through your deck at rapid speed, so you'll find it before it dies. And you just basically don't really worry too much about Sentient as it just provides a lot of value for you on the bottom floor, clearing out all the backliners. Because 40 spikes, that'll clear out everything in the game, right? And it's especially nice against Diligent. You're basically always getting these purifiers dead. And then you just heal it back to full every now and then. And it's not that high of an investment to do that. Just every now and then play an Unleashed Wildwood down there, right? It's even not bad of a permafrost and holdover target. It's a weird one, but it's like, sometimes you just don't want to actually have it eat a draw. And you don't need to play it that turn, but you like to have it when you need it, but you also like it to come back just for immediate need if you need it. So there's just a lot of uses for Unleash the Wildwood. I do stand by it being in the S tier, but I might say it's like S minus because there are definitely runs where it's redundant with what you're trying to do. It doesn't always make sense to add to a deck. I mean, if you're quick and you're not really getting hit, which is often the case with Awoken, I mean, quick sweepers, am I right? You just don't need Unleash. The next one, Wildwood Tome. I debated that this was S tier, but I'm going to put it at the top of A tier. I think Wildwood Tome is just a very solid card. It's really nice to have just in 40% chance, of your Awoken runs, 40%. You will just have easy access to quick, right? This is kind of one of the reasons I don't really think I respect the Predator path of Wilton. I think I'm a little bit against the grain there. I might come around on it. I've seen some decent arguments for it, but I still am not 100% convinced. I really think I'd almost always prefer Thornlord or Strangler. But this is like one of the big reasons. In 40% of my runs, I can just have Wildwood Tome on top of just the fact that Merchant of Steels have them and, the Animus of Speed Infusion has them. But, quick is a nice upgrade. It's funny to compare, though. You can tell, so like, Wildwood Tome, right? You got the 4 big upgrades at Merchant of Steel. You got Quick, you got Large Stone, you got Endless, you got Multi-Strike. You got Wildwood Tome here, 1 Ember, Consume, it's a rare, it's a tome. No downside, it just applies quick. It applies that big upgrade. Then you got also the Melting Remnant variant, which is the same story. Rare, 1 cost, tome, consume, it applies endless, no downside. Just applies it. Now you got Hellhorned, 1 Horn Tome, rare, 5 cost, consume, apply multi-strike, huge downside with Fragile. You got Umbra, Furnace Tap, rare, consume, not a tome, but that's not a big deal. It's still kind of in the same vein here. 2 cost, and it has a pretty big downside. 4 Ember Drain. Outside of an Ember Drain deck, that's a pretty big downside. So, kind of funny that Multi-Strike comes with no downside at the Merchant of Steels. It's right just equal there with Quick and Endless, and then Large Stone, for some reason, gets a downside. Fucking wild to me. It makes no sense. But anyway, all that being said, you can see the value there, right? You get literally just that 100 gold, 100-ish, 110-ish, whatever, on average, gold, big upgrade, just 1 cost, no real investment needed here, right? But, I would say in most cases, I'm going to benefit more from the S tier cards here. That being said, though, it was almost in my S tier. It was usually what I'll do when I create these is I'll do it before looking at my data, and then I'll look at my data and reassess. I did have Wild Tome in my S, and then I looked at my data, and then I dropped it back down to A, because it just isn't really on the level of my S tiers here in terms of takeability. So that's pretty much the Awoken tier here, right, at a glance. So you have some real high rolls and you got some pretty generally useless stuff, right? I would put everything's, honestly, like, you could probably argue D tier for all of my C tier here, but in a general sense, this is not a good C tier, let's put it that way. Sometimes the C tier for some of these lists, some of these clans lists is okay. This is like borderline not okay. And then you have just one of the worst cards in the game with Spreading Spores. So 4 of them, half of them aren't very good, but the other half are amazing. And you're going to see this with almost every clan at the rare tier, to be quite honest. Like, most of them, it's about half of them are great and half of them are pretty shit. But that'll do it for this one. I did say we're going to look at the data really quick, so I just want to support my arguments here. So this is from July 1st onward. And we can even talk about some of these other ones, but you see Awoken Rail Spike here. It is 55 and 4. Not that rare, is it? I mean, it's almost as taken as Razor Sharp Edge. So, granted, a lot of these times it's getting taken outside of the clan, though, so it has that going for it. But that's worth mentioning. That shows that cavern is found enough. That this card, if you say it in the context of a spike, if you say, oh, it's a rare, is it really that rare? I don't think so. It's gonna tie into my later arguments for Shroud Spike. But anyway, it's taken more than Restore. I don't really have a choice with that one, right? And then even, no uncommon beats it. Only one common beats it at Razor Sharp Edge. And then Ensnare here, is the uncommon that comes closest. Ensnare is a very good card, right? But it's at 48 and 6. So, yeah, Wilkins Rail Spike has a clear advantage on basically every other rare in the game for my take rates. I'll tell you what, I will show my data at the end of each of these, just if you're curious. I know a lot of people are. I would be. But then, here's another one, Adaptive Mutation. Like I said, within clan, doesn't have anything, and it also doesn't always make sense in a deck, but here we are, it's still one of my most taken cards in the game. It's taken more than Wildenton. Another card that can be found out, all of these rares can be found outside of the clan, and often Adaptive makes its way into other clans' decks, but, other clan combos decks. But even within, it's just so often takeable, and look at that, hard to deny 34 and 3 that it's an amazing S tier card, right? It's above, still a lot of uncommons and commons that get taken a lot. And then, Unleash the Wildwood, like I said, it was borderline. I think 25 wins is kind of my general threshold for S tier for the rares that I'm going to have here. There's going to be a few exceptions, but that's the general kind of tilting point for me. You'll notice that the Tome didn't make it up there. So 25 and 2, hard to deny the power of Unleash the Wildwood. But the Tome was a bit further down. See, it's at 14 and 3, and keep in mind, it's a Tome, so it can be found outside the clan, and I would like Quick outside the clan a lot of the time. So it was 14 and 3, and to me, that kept it out of the S tier. I had it as S tier, just on a feel, like it feels good to have this, but it is worth noting that it's taken significantly less than my other S tier options here, so it didn't feel right to put it in the S tier, and it also doesn't necessarily have, not that, at this sample size, I don't give too much stock to the win rate, but it is worth noting that the win rate isn't necessarily supporting that this is necessarily a super S tier card. I've lost my music. We'll just quickly look at the others. So Cycle of Life, it's 5 and 0. So technically it is winning, but just isn't taken that often. Channel Song, 8 and 2. So only 10 picks. Which I guess if you compare it to Wildwood Tome, it's not that much less. So I had Channel Song in my D tier before I looked at the data, and I bumped it up to C. I didn't really have good, reason to bump it anything higher than C, though I do still think it's a pretty shit card, but maybe it ends up, jumping up. And then we go down further and we see that, Shard Channeler here is 1 and 0. Like I said, though, it's not that represented well here because I know for a fact you can even find it on recording. I do other users' seeds, and this is integral to them. And then also Spreading Spores, just 4 and 2. Look at that. Even though it's a small sample size, look at that effect. It's 22% less win rate than the rest of my Awoken runs. Horrible card. I've given it chances. It fucking sucks. Anyway, that'll do it for this one. As always, let me know what you think. Let me see those comments. If you agree, disagree, if there's any surprises. Love to hear it. Love the discussion. You don't have to agree with me. I am, these are all just like my opinion, right? Like I don't have so much hubris to think that I'm always just the right one, but I will say that I always try to support I try to support my stuff and make it as accurate and true to my own experience as possible, but my experience isn't everyone's experience, right? Everyone has different experiences with these cards. You can only play so many runs in Monster Train. You know, I would even say these higher, I wouldn't even say 55 and a 4 is necessarily what I would consider statistically significant, right? So I can only support things with data. I can't say, oh, this is just proof, right? These are never 100% proof. It's just my supporting data for the arguments. So talk to your ear off. Thanks for getting through it. We got through it. We're going to move on to, who knows? Who knows what we'll move on to? It'll be a rare, whatever it is, but we'll come to it when we come to it. As always, thanks for watching, and until next time, peace.